Okay, welcome everybody. We are here to look a little deeper into the topic of partnership, digital and economic development. Christina's got about 10 minutes to give you a little bit more detail about that, and then we're going to have a discussion. We just left a very rich discussion. I think we had 120 or half the public meeting in here, the last rotation, so I think we'll be able to get a little bit more focused this time. So Christina, over to you. She's the Vice President, Innovation, Sustainability, and Prosperity at Waterfront Toronto, and you would have heard from her at the opening plenary.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I just want to introduce a couple of my team members that are here with me today. There's Vance Lockton, who's our Manager of Digital Governance, Michael Wolf, who is our Manager of Innovation and Prosperity, and is George still in the room? If not, okay, George Zagaric will also be joining us, our CEO for Waterfront Toronto. So I'm just going to go through. We have a fairly robust set of things that we are going to be dealing with in this room. We're going to look at some of the economic development solutions that Sidewalk Labs have put forward, some of the digital pieces around enabling a responsible digital environment, and then the partnership considerations around Sidewalk Labs. So just to recap, what we were looking at achieving is building on Waterfront Toronto's mandate around economic development, jobs, and prosperity, looking at how Quayside can be used to leverage this to help to increase the job opportunities that were existing in the waterfront. We've always had this commitment as part of our mandate, and in fact in the East Bayfront Precinct Plan, as I mentioned in the plenary, we were always committed to establishing 8,000 jobs in that neighborhood, roughly three-quarters of which would be in the information and communications technology field. We have our intelligent community framework within the waterfront, which was focused on creating the enabling infrastructure for innovation. So we have our partnership with Beanfield. And now this was another opportunity to bring in new innovation to this neighborhood that could actually leverage that infrastructure and to help to create new jobs and leverage some of the work that was being done by OCAD, George Brown College, the University of Toronto, and Mars, who's coming down to that area as well. When we were evaluating, we were looking at how well the solutions would achieve our priority objective of job creation and the potential to catalyze the urban innovation industry. And we feel that the proposal contains well-developed strategies to catalyze the urban innovation industry within Toronto, and more specifically, the building technologies and tall timber, new mobility, and sustainable technology sector. We are presenting an opportunity here that can help to tap into a $2 trillion industry by 2025. Just to recap some of the feedback that we've heard to date, in each of those three areas, there's been both support and things that people have suggested that we consider. There's generally been support about the economic development opportunity, about the job creation capacity for the program, and there's also been concerns or considerations around digital governance and making sure that, in fact, the public sector is the one that it has the responsibility around privacy and digital governance issues, as well as looking at the protections that need to be in place for Canadian companies, and of course, looking at the notion of trust and how Sidewalk Labs is structured and who the relationships are with their parent company. Looking more at economic development, there were 25 different solutions that were proposed in the Master Innovation and Development Plan. Waterfront Toronto has evaluated those and actually supported all 25 of them. I do want to point out that there's a solution that actually appears in both economic development and digital that relates to having a need for support for advocacy for policy change or regulatory reform that we've supported, and that is actually Koala, which is a digital mounting solution. The policy change that we would be looking to support there isn't about digital or about data or about privacy, it's about the actual infrastructure mounting process or technology that gets used there. You'll also notice that there are a few digitally enabled solutions that we've supported, and those again are the ones with the little halos. I do want to just put a little caveat there that through this process we've also identified that additional work will be done on the economic development assessment. The evaluation that we looked at predominantly focused on the economic development of the potential of the proposals contained within the MIDP, and there is still some work to be done if the project moves forward. One of which is to expand what we're looking at from simply job creation to job and wealth creation, and looking at that from the lens of the broader sort of contribution to the Canadian economy. Doing a broader scan of the ecosystem to understand what solutions actually are opportunities for Canadian companies to participate in potentially. And then also looking at a revised economic impact report to look at how the project actually translates into economic impact on the basis of the smaller geography and the actual proposals that are being put forward through what's known as the innovation plan. We also have noted that moving forward, economic development is one of the key areas that we'll need to make sure we are monitoring the effectiveness of if we decide to move to implementation. So just for an example, one of the economic development solutions that was put forward was a commitment around a mass timber building structure and modular construction and factory, which represented an $80 million commitment from Sidewalk Labs into a tall timber factory based in Ontario. This is something that Waterfront Toronto both supported and sees an opportunity potentially for other levels of government to engage in a conversation about growing this new economic cluster. From a digital perspective, there were 15 different solutions that were put forward from Sidewalk Labs that actually all related to how they could create a responsible digital environment. These aren't the actual digitally enabled solutions, was what they were referred to in the MIDP. Those are being covered off more fully in the different rooms that touch on those technologies, so around mobility, sustainability, and around the complete communities component. One of the things Sidewalk Labs put forward was a series of internal accountability mechanisms. We call these the enabling digital components. We've supported those and feel that they are good things that Sidewalk Labs has included. They are things like publishing using common published standards for the development of their technologies so that other companies can engage and leverage that technology as well. And then looking at responsible data use guidelines and a responsible data use assessment process that they've piloted internally. This wouldn't apply to other groups. It wouldn't be a replacement for privacy impact assessments and threat risk assessments, but they are internal mechanisms that would allow them to actually be able to complete those other types of documents that will be required. In terms of a digitally enabled solution, just by way of one example, the automated schedulers are something that we also felt could help us achieve some of our objectives around sustainability and affordability by way of actually letting individuals opt in to be able to have their appliances and so on running at a more efficient time, where perhaps hydro rates and so on were lower, so it would adjust so your dishwasher or your washer and dryer would run when it wasn't peak hours for your hydro. Koala, as I said, is a standardized mount, and this is one that we see that there could be a need for some sort of regulatory reform about how they attach to the poles. But overall, the intent is that these devices would allow you to attach, remove, and reattach devices, whether those be lighting, sensors, fixtures, decorations for different festivals, much more quickly and easily without having to close down the streets for an extended period of time. So overall, I just want to remind folks that although we have done our evaluation, the conclusion about where we've categorized these various different solutions doesn't mean that we've approved moving ahead with the project or a partnership with Sidewalk Labs. It does mean, however, that we do see merit in including these solutions in the draft innovation plan for Quayside. But we're looking to you for some feedback about outstanding concerns and how you feel that we've categorized these pieces and whether or not there's other things that you think that we need to be considering through this next phase. With regards to partnership considerations, there were 4 key things that we looked at as we evaluated Sidewalk Labs as a potential partner moving forward. The first was their organizational capacity and capabilities. How much access did we have to the partner talent, new methodologies and new technologies? The partner experience, how was decision-making made? What was the ease of decision-making, the speed of it, issue resolution and reliability and consistency on delivering the promises? Their financial performance, the administrative cost and time burden on Waterfront Toronto and actually managing the partnership with Sidewalk Labs. Do we have access to new funding and revenue opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise had? And then the 4th key component was public impact and looking at the public perception of the partner and the broad benefits of the project. In addition to those areas, we've also undergone 3 rounds of formal due diligence in the partner selection. We've undertaken formal legal due diligence and commercial due diligence at 3 points, including when we selected Sidewalk Labs, executed the framework agreement, and executed the plan development agreement. So these look at fairly standard things like the team composition and organizational capacity, the financial strength of the firm, corporate structure, and any outstanding litigation against Sidewalk Labs. If there is a decision to move forward in the project, there'll be another round of due diligence conducted on Sidewalk Labs prior to Waterfront Toronto entering into any of the implementation agreements. A very important part, regardless of how we've evaluated the partner, is how do we actually mitigate any concerns that arise with the project or partner moving forward. And we need to make sure that we manage the commercial risk and legal risk appropriately. So we will look to require mitigations such as defining and sharing that liability, so understanding clearly what the roles and responsibilities, accountability and transparency mechanisms might be, managing performance shortfall or default, so having clear audit rights not just financially in this case, but also technically in terms of data and security. Having backstop and contractual requirements, including appropriate financial security on the systems, understanding where there could be step-in provisions if systems fail. How does Waterfront Toronto ensure that those can be set back up so that there is a viable technical solution if one of the more risky innovations per se happen to not be successfully deployed. The risk mitigations that we've considered, though, are not comprehensive through what I've listed off, and they may be further augmented through the outputs that come out from something called a preliminary human rights impact assessment that we're currently working with a firm on. That is in response to some of the earlier concerns that have been raised through our earlier rounds of public consultation, and those could serve as additional mitigations that might be required because of the nature of the project or partner. Just to quickly recap, and this is actually in your discussion guide, so I won't go through them in great detail, but as part of our threshold issues resolution in October, there were a number of key commitments around data governance and privacy that set the stage for how this project could potentially move forward, one of which is ensuring that Sidewalk Labs reinforce their commitment to comply with all existing and future legislation, regulations, and policy frameworks, as well as our digital principles, which we consulted with you on in the past year, as well as our emerging intelligent community guidelines. Personal data will be collected and stored in Canada that's been collected for the project. Digitally enabled solutions will not impede fundamental freedoms, and where feasible will foster accessibility, public engagement, and participation in Quayside. We are, as Waterfront Toronto, the project lead and interface with governments on all digital governance and privacy-related matters. There will be further public consultation on digital solutions with an emphasis on ensuring engagement with groups most impacted by the proposed technologies. And those digital proposals being put forward may be required to go through a formal public meeting process and approval by governments, depending on what they actually are that get put into the plan to potentially move forward. Just to highlight on our digital principles, which are to the right, there is a focus on equity, ethical approaches to including technology, having users have the ability to understand and control how their data is being used, having strong privacy protections in place, including the de-identification of all personal data that would be collected in source, and data and systems will remain under local control and be subject to applicable laws. I think one of the other important things to keep in mind is that through the threshold issues resolution, Waterfront Toronto is responsible for the deployment of all of the municipal infrastructure systems and the public realm, which has traditionally been our role. And therefore, this normal city processes and things like that that happen in other neighborhoods in the City of Toronto would also apply to this neighborhood. Also, something that's unique to this project, but has also been a concern, has been the notion around intellectual property and how do we make sure that Canadian companies have an opportunity to participate. In October, we resolved 3 key issues there with Sidewalk Labs as well. One was securing a global patent pledge, which allows Canadian innovators to actually develop on top of the Sidewalk Labs intellectual property without the fear of having legal action against them for doing so. The other was securing a revenue share on products and services piloted in Waterfront Toronto so that the public sector is actually financially recognized for their contribution to the project as well. And we've confirmed Waterfront Toronto's licensing rights to site-specific IP that's been developed so far. So over the past 2 years, a lot of good hard work has been done, and being able to move forward with or without Sidewalk, but be able to leverage those assets, that was something we also put in place in October. I think it's also worthy of noting 3 key commitments Waterfront Toronto is making to help with the ecosystem development components on this. The first is really looking at the global patent pledge and how a strong non-assert provision can clear the way for Canadian companies to go to scale and compete globally. The other is to respect the sovereignty of Canadian companies with fair and transparent procurement processes. And the third is to work with governments, stakeholders, and standard-setting bodies on data and IP-related issues so that we can benefit from a broader pool of knowledge that's available to us. And all of that combined will really help to ensure that Canadian companies have the freedom to operate so that they can grow and prosper. So with that, I will hand it back to Nicole. I'm hoping that came in close to the 10-minute mark for you.
It's perfect. Thank you very much. So the way we handled this conversation in the first round of the breakout sessions was to really leave it to the tables to navigate which of the questions they're most interested in answering. Notwithstanding that there's those questions on the screen, you also have questions attached to your agenda, which are really, and I'll just reinforce them. Do you think the innovations, these are relevant for the economic development solutions proposed, but obviously in this room we're also talking about partnerships in digital. So the questions that we would like you to work through, should they work for you, are really attached to your agenda there. Do you think the innovations raise the bar on meeting the urban challenges? Why or why not? Do you think that Waterfront Toronto has identified sufficient controls to manage risk? What other controls would you like to see considered? And that could relate to digital or the financial relationship or any aspect. Do you think that Waterfront Toronto has appropriately prioritized solutions for public investment? You might have talked about that in one of the other breakout rooms already, so I don't know that that'll be high on your list for this discussion. Are there some innovations you would like to see prioritized over others, or what would you like to see in terms of commitments from Sidewalk Labs to this project? The conversation we had in the first rotation actually strayed quite a bit from those questions, and it was extremely useful. So what I'm going to suggest is we turn it over to each of the tables. And is there a table that does not have, if you're on your own at a table and there's no facilitator there, I really encourage you to join a table where there is a facilitator so that we can take notes and capture your perspective. Just put your hand up if you're a facilitator. So this table, this table, this table, this table, you guys have one. This one, this one. You guys don't have a facilitator right now. Oh, you do? And over there and at the back, maybe just join a table that has one. And we'll be having this conversation probably for a good 20 minutes. And then I'm going to ask each of the facilitators to come and give a point or two from their discussion. And then we're going to have the wrap-up plenary. So over to you. Take the conversation where you need it to. So you have a flavor of how the discussion went. We had very many different opinions in the first round of discussion. I expect we'll have them again. I'm going to give it to each facilitator to give us a point or two from the highlights of their discussion.
Great. So our table had a couple main takeaways. One was just a concern about what it means to have kind of private control over what used to be kind of public services and commodities, and how tech will allow kind of a greater privatization of a lot of the public realm. So there was some concern about that. And also there was a general feeling that it was hard to go through all of the solutions, all of the suggestions, and how to make it more accessible to the public. And additionally, that people would like to see a stronger role from both the city and Waterfront Toronto. They feel like right now it's really a conversation between Sidewalk and the public, and there was a stronger desire for a role from the city and from government in the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
So as far as my table, some of the conversations that we had were about the need to ensure strong public-private partnerships and how the public is capable of getting value for the resources that are still sort of undetermined as far as what they're worth, and the need to make a good deal. And as we still are unsure of what value is at this point, that there needs to be meaningful points at which we can come together and determine whether or not we are getting a good deal. And then
When they said there needs to be additional time, were they implying that the public would come together to determine?
I think as far as once we have implemented or if we come to an agreement, and there is I don't know if the public would then get involved again, or it's sort of like we have a lot of questions about whether or not the public has their capacity to be involved in these conversations as things change. And then that goes also to the fact that you might need something a little bit more agile to adapt to changes which evolve over time at a pace that might be more rapid than traditional public groups can get on top of.
Okay, thank you. So in the spirit of needing to ensure a strong public-private partnership, we need to make sure the public can ensure public value is extracted, and that is in some way the public has an opportunity to be involved in that assessment over time.
Sure.
Good, Jenna.
Right, we had a substantive and varied conversation. In terms of the innovations, there was a bit of a spectrum there, but there was general agreement that there are a lot of misconceptions in the public right now about the state of the project and certain aspects of the project, and that it's incumbent on Waterfront Toronto to convey more detailed information through more channels to reach the public as much as possible. There was a general sense that these misconceptions are a result of other entities out there other than Waterfront Toronto dominating the conversation, and that Waterfront Toronto is really in a position to convey clear, detailed information and through multiple channels that can engage multiple people. In terms of other concerns that were raised, there were questions around the RFP process down the road and what preferred partners might look like, information around local versus foreign labor, that type of thing. There is a very clear need for that information. And in terms of priorities, there were concerns about things like heated sidewalks and whether or not there was a level of analysis that it meets sustainability objectives and how it will be prioritized based on some of those broader objectives. So there's clearly a need for more information across the board and more level of detail.
Okay, so I think, so firstly there were comments about the process, and you know, as one person sort of said, they've liked the idea of this, they've disliked how it's gone. They felt as though Sidewalk had too much control at the outset, that the MIDP was almost sort of deliberately confusing, and that there's a bit of a sense now that this is a bit of a foregone conclusion that this is going to happen, and that this is just sort of a risk mitigation exercise. In terms of the public consultations, there was another interesting point or question around if this is sort of a market-making effort on Sidewalk or Google's behalf, wanting to know how many of the innovations would be proprietary Google solutions, and is it a foregone conclusion that those would be applied or not? And then I guess the last one was a question around, so how would the deal actually work? So would we assume you start from the $590 million land value, and then you start to make investments out of that funding into a lot of the sort of public benefits? I think that's the way it's been communicated, but just confirming if that's how it would work.
All right, very quickly, we had a really good discussion about the social aspects of this project and whether it's going to help improve people's lives, and that's still questionable. It's unclear how it would do that. One individual said that in regard to the social aspects and improving our social welfare, is that we don't have the ability to imagine beyond the economic means, and this project doesn't provide anything beyond that. And the other point is that there's a continued mistrust of Google, that they're profit-driven, and that was a concern in the group.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So the two key points for my table, they think that we're focusing too much on data, and there's smart cities doesn't necessarily have to focus on technology, but also smart decisions. So a more human-centric approach to the final decision. And then the second point, they would like to see Waterfront Toronto as transformational leaders, taking us through this innovative pilot project.
So I had a great conversation at our table. We had a very, very full table, so it made for a very lively conversation. Generally, they were very, very supportive of the entire project, mainly around innovation and job creation. So when it came to the job creation, they said, I'm 110% in support of it, very, very supportive of it. Their question around data is what data exactly is being collected and who's collecting it. And they would prefer if the government agencies are collecting the data.
A couple of ideas around the evaluation processes. So firstly, they'd really like to see the right digital subject matter experts within Waterfront Toronto, and they feel Sidewalk currently has way more of that. Secondly, there's a bit of a conflict of interest they observe within the evaluation committee because half of them are from the Waterfront Toronto. And lastly, they would like explanation and rationale behind each decision that's made rather than a summary, and especially looking at why a digital solution had to be pursued rather than an analog one, for example.
Okay, thank you very much.
So at our table, we had generally a little bit of support as a way for this project to bring fresh ideas to the table and a way to test them. We did have some expressions of doubt over the effectiveness of these solutions at 12 acres and sort of a request for more clarity of how some of these could be achieved at 12 acres, if at all. And on that note as well, sort of a request for a sort of clearer story of how the plan is evolving, just because there is some murkiness in terms of sort of like every time we meet, smaller things change, and just a request for like what is it, and how are these changes being made, and what are they exactly, and which ideas are fresh and which ideas are reworked ones from things that we already seen before. And then overall, again, highlighting of the of data privacy, of de-identification, and being assured that de-identification is taking place first of all, and sort of to what level, as we have learned that there are different levels of de-identification, and making sure that we're sort of doing the most that we can in that sense.
Okay, thank you very much. I expect the door to open shortly with the other 3 rooms coming in. And what we're then going to do, I'm just going to take a minute and look at how what we just heard compared to what we heard in the first breakout room. But there's no question there is a real mix between people who are outwardly supportive and people who have major concerns. And people are very specific about what they like and what they don't like, and the expectations they have for Waterfront Toronto in terms of the process moving forward. So maybe the doors will open, more people will come. We are going to wrap up at 12:30, so please stay with us, and we're going to have a final plenary, and there will be some open mic opportunity there if you feel that you haven't had a chance to get your point across with any of your small tables. Okay, so just bear with us in the next 5 minutes. I think that'll start.